Portlock was cursed and Bigfoot's place and nobody goes there.
Overnight, everybody left.
But then people started to disappear.
Just gone.
Something creepy started happening in Alaska when people started disappearing. Bodies were discovered in horrifying conditions, and whispers of a creature haunted the land. It was enough to drive residents of an Alaskan village to leave everything behind, transforming Portlock into a desolate ghost town. What happened in Portlock, this seemingly peaceful village nestled near the sea, was something more sinister than most could imagine. For years, this village faced abandonment, not once or twice, but 4 times. Today, we'll dive into the unsettling history that surrounds this place and uncover why it was deserted repeatedly, each time under equally mysterious and fearsome circumstances. First glimpses of dread. Unlike many ghost towns scattered across America, Portlock holds a unique history. Settlers tried to call it home 4 times, spanning centuries, only to abandon it each time in the face of unexplained threats. The earliest documented explorer to set foot in Portlock was a British captain named Nathaniel Portlock, who arrived in 1785. This encounter gave the land its name, but also marked the beginning of its cursed history.
It's terrorizing people, killing their pets, being destructive. That's the kind of specimen that I'd like to take. If I'm out in the woods one night or one day and I see a Bigfoot, I'm not going to shoot. That's going to have to happen in order for mainstream science to ever acknowledge that these creatures exist.
When Portlock's crew first arrived, they were shocked to find remnants of an old native village. The signs were clear. People had lived here, and yet for some reason, they had all left. This discovery puzzled Portlock's crew. The land was rich with game and fish, a perfect spot for a community to thrive. Why then had the previous settlers abandoned such an ideal place? Despite the mystery, Portlock and his men decided to establish a settlement. But soon, members of the crew began falling ill. It wasn't a typical sickness. It was accompanied by intense fear, a creeping sense of dread that overtook even the strongest among them. Terrified and weakened, the crew begged Portlock to abandon the area. Reluctantly, he agreed, and they left the land that would eventually bear his name. Unbeknownst to them, they were not the first Europeans to experience the strange forces surrounding Portlock. Just 6 years before Portlock's arrival, a group of Spanish explorers had attempted to settle in the same area. They too found it odd that such a bountiful land had been deserted by its original inhabitants. Yet, like Portlock's men, they were soon plagued by a strange sickness and a sense of overpowering fear. The Spanish explorers began hearing eerie cries coming from the dense forests, sounds that drew closer with each passing night. One by one, the crew gave in to the fear and sickness, and eventually, they fled. Waves of fear. The mystery deepens. Both Portlock's and the Spanish crews had endured harsh conditions and brutal climates before, yet something about this place was different. Something in Portlock made them abandon their resolve. Could it be a special sickness, or was it something else that drove them to flee from a land so promising?
I think it's they're out looking for food, maybe raiding the campgrounds or sneaking around. In the winter, they're looking for people with chicken farms or sheep or something so they can grab a quick meal.
One theory that emerged was infrasound. Known as a low-frequency sound wave that certain mammals produce, infrasound can affect humans in unsettling ways, causing nausea, dizziness, and an overwhelming sense of unease. Though inaudible to human ears, its effects can be powerful, disorienting even the most resilient. Creatures like tigers use infrasound to paralyze their prey, and it's believed that sperm whales employ similar tactics to terrify their targets into stillness. If infrasound was indeed the culprit, then perhaps it was a natural predator, hidden in the forests, emitting these waves to drive out unwanted visitors. However, the true nature of the predator remained unknown, and those who dared to return to Portlock in the future would face far greater horrors. A return and the rise of terror. For over 80 years, Portlock remained abandoned, left untouched by human hands. Then, in 1867, a group of nomadic Sukbiak, native to the region, decided to settle there. The land offered an abundance of resources, from clams and fish to moose roaming the forests. They felt blessed to find such a rich land and celebrated the start of their new lives. But their peace was short-lived. Only a month after their arrival, the Sukbiak faced attacks. But these were not the raids they were accustomed to from rival tribes. The attackers, according to the Sukbiak, were something far more terrifying. Cannibal giants, monstrous beings that descended upon their village with insatiable hunger. These giants did not raid for food or supplies, they came for human flesh. Night after night, the assaults continued, each one more savage than the last. The attackers, towering in size and primal in nature, showed no mercy, raiding the village with a brutality the Sukbiak had never encountered before. The villagers attempted to fight, hoping to defend their newfound home, but the relentless attacks wore them down. Strangely, whenever the game was plentiful in the forest, the giants would disappear, leaving the village in peace. But as soon as the animals were scarce, the giants returned, each time more bloodthirsty than before. The man-eating giants return. As food in the forest grew scarcer, the giants' attacks on the village became relentless, driving the Sukbiak away from their home once more. They left Portlock in 1905, but not without tales of their terrifying encounters with these cannibal giants. Stories of night raids and human-hunting creatures spread, casting a long shadow over Portlock, where no one dared settle for years. However, in 1921, another group braved the cursed land. The nomadic community of Russian Alutiiq arrived, bringing with them the progress and security of the 20th century. They established a bustling cannery to take advantage of the plentiful salmon, built a post office, a school, and other essential facilities, aiming to build a true modern town.
For the existence of Bigfoot, because I saw it on his face and I saw it in his eyes, and I know they're real. I think it would be great if he was still alive to see the popularity of the Bigfoot culture and its acceptance in the world that we have today.
Despite the stories of the Nanak, translated by some as half-man, half-beast, and by others as giant hairy thing, they were determined to make Portlock a safe and thriving community. Rules and restrictions in a haunting land. The Alutiiq knew the legends of Portlock well, thanks to their Sukbiak ancestors who had fled years before. The Nanak was known to prowl the misty forests, and the Alutiiq were not about to ignore the warnings. To protect themselves, they enforced strict rules, beginning with a nightly curfew. Armed guards were stationed around the cannery, the school, and even the streets to keep the community safe. Most notably, the Alutiiq avoided the fog and the dense forest at all costs. On foggy days, villagers stayed indoors, heeding the tales of those who'd heard the eerie sounds in the mist. For nearly a decade, these precautions appeared to work. Though the residents sometimes heard the Nanak moving through the fog, its presence was kept at bay. Portlock thrived in peace, until one fateful event shook the town to its core, revealing just how real the danger was. A deadly mistake. As Portlock grew, so did the residents' sense of safety, and by 1930, they had become more lax about the once strict rules. Then, in 1931, a logger named Andrew Clock ventured into the forest, breaking the unspoken rule to stay near the edges. When he failed to return, his friends organized a search party, hoping to find him alive.
You know, no matter how much proof you hand to the scientific community, they're not going to believe it until, like I said, they can do an autopsy on one. Or necropsy, I guess, if it's an animal.
What they found instead horrified them. Clock's body lay in a mangled state, his head crushed by his own sled. A sled so heavy that no human could have moved it alone. His loyal dogs, which had been dragging the sled, were discovered torn to shreds nearby, and the sled itself was flung far from the scene. The men who found Clock's remains were speechless, unable to understand the violent display before them. What sort of creature could have done this? Clock's fate was a chilling reminder of the unseen predator lurking in the forest, one whose strength and savagery defied belief. Face to face with the beast. Clock's death left the town on edge. Soon after, another resident, Tom Larson, ventured out to chop wood for fish traps. As he worked by the shore, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive, hairy creature standing upright on the beach. It was too large and animalistic to be human, yet it stared at him with a disturbing intelligence. Larson, feeling an unnatural compulsion, raced home to grab his rifle. Returning to the beach, he aimed at the creature, finger on the trigger. But as he locked eyes with it, he found himself paralyzed, unable to pull the trigger. The creature stared him down, and Larson could only watch as it slowly retreated into the forest. Though Larson didn't fire, his encounter left the town in no doubt. The Nanak was real, and it was becoming bolder. No longer content with stalking the forests, the creature was now targeting humans outright.
A lot more groups involved in wanting to go out and prove that this thing exists. Is it going to be proven or is it not going to be proven? Well, curiosity drives human nature. And if you're always looking for something, you're going to find it.
Clock's death seemed to have stirred something primal in the creature, something vengeful. And soon after, more residents of Portlock began to vanish without a trace. A vengeful spirit stalks Portlock. With Clock's death and Larson's sighting, fear settled over Portlock. People whispered that the Nanak had a vengeful spirit, like a tiger that remembers a poacher or an elephant that retaliates against those who threaten its herd. The Nanak seemed to hold a grudge. Some villagers recalled tales of a tiger that once haunted a hunter, destroying his traps and scaring away his prey in retribution. The Nanak, they reasoned, was not so different, a creature of wrath, willing to bide its time until it could strike back. At first, a few gold prospectors vanished, but the townspeople assumed they were on extended trips. Then a group of hunters disappeared, yet again dismissed as a possible long expedition. But soon, a clear pattern emerged, and each disappearance drew the unseen predator closer to the heart of Portlock. A predator reveals its true nature. At first, the people of Portlock attributed the disappearances to various causes, but as bodies began turning up in increasingly gruesome states, the truth became undeniable. Some bodies washed ashore in the bay, bearing deep claw and bite marks. Others were found mauled beyond recognition, as if ravaged by something with an insatiable hunger. As fear gripped the community, the Alutiiq attempted to return to their original strict rules. But no amount of caution seemed capable of stopping the creature that had developed a taste for human flesh. Most residents began to accept that the Nanak was real, though some skeptics clung to the belief that the attacks were the work of an exceptionally clever bear.
They have a distribution over the continent very similar to that of black bears. They have the same needs as Sasquatches do.
But soon, the discovery of a body changed everything, solidifying even the most doubtful minds. One day, a corpse was found, swept down from the mountains by spring rains. The remains were torn and dismembered in a manner no bear could achieve. The message was clear. Something beyond their understanding was stalking the residents of Portlock. The growing death toll. The Alutiiq tried everything to defend themselves. They increased the number of guards and enforced curfews with even greater vigilance. Yet, nothing stopped the creature that seemed determined to hunt them down. Bodies continued to turn up along trails, near rivers, and even in the bay, often so mutilated that they were nearly unrecognizable. By some estimates, up to 36 bodies were discovered, while countless others simply vanished, never to be seen again. Official reports claimed around 15 people had gone missing, but the Alutiiq insisted the true number was far higher. They argued that the way these bodies were mutilated went beyond the capabilities of any bear or wolf. The townspeople began to lose hope, and eventually, the mounting death toll made life in Portlock unbearable. Despite their best efforts to carry on, fear permeated the town, and survival became increasingly unlikely, an overnight departure. In 1950, the Alutiiq made a decision that defied conventional evacuation plans. They left suddenly, almost overnight. In an attempt to outwit the intelligent predator, the entire town evacuated swiftly and without warning, leaving behind only a post office worker. This lone man, staying on duty to fulfill the last obligations of the town's service, barricaded himself inside the post office. During those final, eerie nights, he reported hearing heavy two-legged footsteps echoing through the empty streets of the abandoned village. After some time, even he closed the post office for good, leaving Portlock entirely deserted by 1951. One would think that the creature, having successfully driven out the townsfolk, would retreat back into the wilderness.
They're prevalent in their storytelling traditions as well. But then the settlers came in the late 1700s, and they too started running into yowies. which is another very strong indicator that they're a real biological animal.
But it seemed the Nanak had developed a relentless hunger for human prey, one that extended far beyond the boundaries of Portlock. Encounters beyond the abandoned village. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1969, a hunter ventured into the forest near the ghost town, hoping to track wild goats. Instead, he found himself gripped by terror as he realized he was not alone. Initially, he noticed subtle sounds, slow, deliberate footsteps and faint rustling in the underbrush. But within moments, those footsteps grew faster, louder. He was not simply being followed, he was being chased. The hunter bolted, never daring to look back, as a blood-curdling scream echoed through the trees. The creature pursued him until he finally burst out of the forest, his heart racing, his spirit shaken. 5 years later, in 1973, 3 hunters sought refuge from a storm in Portlock. As night fell, they huddled together, unable to sleep, for something was circling their camp, growling and emitting eerie, unintelligible sounds. Each man would later swear that the creature walked on 2 feet, its footsteps deliberate and heavy, hinting at something human yet entirely monstrous. The tracks in the grass. Not long after, another group of hunters experienced an equally unsettling encounter. While tracking a moose, they came upon a set of footprints that stopped them in their tracks. Footprints over 18 inches long, unmistakably man-like, yet far too large to belong to any human. The hunters followed the massive prints, realizing with growing horror that they were not the only ones tracking the moose. In a clearing, they found flattened grass, evidence of a fierce struggle. The moose tracks abruptly stopped, suggesting that whatever had left those colossal prints had won the battle.
Has been closely examined by more PhDs and anthropologists than any other data set in all Bigfoot history. I think it's a Bigfoot, but whatever that is, it is quite large and quite massive.
The man-like footprints, however, continued, leading up the mountainside. Whatever creature had bested a fully grown moose was no ordinary predator. It was something far beyond the natural world, something that no one could explain. As Portlock faded into legend, the stories of the Nanak endured, a reminder of the chilling encounters that had driven an entire community away. For those who ventured too close, the lessons of Portlock served as a stark warning. Some places are best left undisturbed. An elder's chilling encounter. One of the most recent and eerie accounts of the creature haunting Portlock comes from 1990. An Anchorage paramedic was called to assist a 70-year-old Alutiiq inmate who had suffered a heart attack in the Eagle River jail. As the paramedic worked to revive the man, he attempted small talk, sharing tales of his own outdoor adventures. But the elder remained silent and still, until the paramedic casually mentioned that he had once hunted in the forests near Portlock. The effect was immediate. The old man suddenly sprang up, gripping the paramedic's shirt, his eyes wide with terror. "Did you see it? Did it bother you?" he demanded over and over, even as guards tried to restrain him. His fear was palpable, and as they led him away, his voice echoed down the hall, repeating the haunting question, "Did you see it? Did it bother you?" Doubts and skepticism, explaining Portlock's dark history. While stories of a monstrous predator have taken hold of the imagination, not everyone is convinced. Some argue that Portlock's mysterious misfortunes can be explained by more mundane causes. For example, the disfigured bodies that were attributed to the Nanak could very well have been victims of bear attacks. Bears, after all, are known to stand on 2 legs and can appear deceptively humanoid in certain lights.
A black bear can be large and black, and it can walk on its 2 hind legs, but this animal seems to be a fully functional quadruped walking routinely on its hind legs, and bears only walk short distances on their hind legs. This also seems to have a much flatter face than a bear, which has a much more pointed snout. So I don't think that is a bear.
Though the locals insisted that no bear could inflict the kind of damage seen, skeptics argue that an especially aggressive bear might have been responsible. Then there was the case of Andrew Clock, the logger found with his head caved in. While the locals believed his death was an attack by the Nanak, skeptics suggest that it might have been a tragic accident. Clock could have struck his head against a tree branch, or he may have suffered a seizure, which can cause disoriented movement. In fact, there have been public cases, like that of Saudi soccer player Abdulrahman al-Shawabi, who after being hit in the neck during a game, got up and wandered aimlessly due to a seizure. While Clock's situation was grim, skeptics suggest his dogs, found torn apart nearby, might have been victims of a bear attack. Yet, the coincidence of events, the seizure, the attack, and Clock's severe injuries, seems to demand an extraordinary alignment of circumstances. The vanished and the legends. Over the years, up to 30 people disappeared in Portlock, their deaths often attributed to the hazardous conditions and dangerous professions of fishing, logging, and hunting. Many skeptics argue that bears, not mythical creatures, were responsible for the mutilated remains discovered along the rivers and in the bay. But the locals maintained that what they witnessed was unlike any bear attack. By the 1950s, the myth of the Nanak had taken root, spreading across Alaska. Some believe that these tales of two-legged creatures lurking in the forest could be exaggerated or fabricated stories, but others point out that such a legend couldn't have originated without a kernel of truth. In fact, one peculiar finding in Portlock defies simple explanation. The Ayutik often came across trees that had been uprooted and driven back into the ground upside down, a sight so bizarre that even critics struggle to attribute it to natural causes. Skeptics might argue that an unusual hurricane or storm could have caused this, but many locals insist it's a phenomenon associated only with the Nanak. A community flees overnight. For those who believe in the Nanak, one question looms large. If the creature was merely a bear, why didn't the Alutiiq simply hunt it down instead of abandoning their town? Alaska's laws permit residents to kill animals that pose a threat to life or property, yet rather than organize a hunting party, the entire community vanished nearly overnight in 1950. Some suggest that the Alutiiq were attempting to outwit an intelligent predator, one that might have retaliated if it sensed the people preparing for battle.
I think that Bigfoot typically is smart enough to get out of the woods during hunting season, and that's what I've kind of noticed. It seems like we get more reports in the spring and in the fall. I will speculate on the fact that when humans are in the forest with weapons, that Bigfoot's probably not going to be around.
Interestingly, some residents, like Sally Ash, have a different story to tell. According to Ash, the reason for Portlock's abandonment had nothing to do with a monstrous creature. Instead, she attributed the move to better economic opportunities, schools, and churches in other areas, such as Nanwalek and Seldovia. Her explanation aligns with a period of regional development that encouraged migration to more prosperous towns. But Ash's version of events becomes complicated when one considers the testimony of her cousin, Melania Kell. In a 2009 interview with the Homer Tribune, Kell spoke openly about the Nanak, insisting that her people left Portlock because it was killing them. Kell's account, interpreted by Ash herself, fueled renewed interest in the legend. Yet, in a later interview, Ash refuted Kell's story, insisting that no such killings took place. While she acknowledged sightings of the Nanak, she downplayed its role in Portlock's history. Questions linger. The legend of the Nanak. Ash's retelling raises more questions than it answers. If the Nanak posed no real danger, why did the Alutiiq follow strict rules about going outside, especially in foggy weather? And if the creature was harmless, why does Ash herself caution travelers to stay quiet and avoid drawing attention when passing through the region? The careful precautions and eerie stories suggest a history far darker than mere economics or community development. Could the Nanak be something other than a bear? Some speculate it might be related to legendary giants like those purported to live in the Solomon Islands. The eerie similarities in descriptions, massive size, two-legged movement, and supernatural strength have led to speculation that the creature in Portlock might be a distant cousin of these island giants. If this is true, it raises an even more profound question. What else remains hidden in the remote corners of the world? The mystery of Portlock endures. The fear that drove people away, the legends of a beast lurking in the fog, and the unsettling encounters recounted by those who braved its borders leave one thing clear. Portlock is a place of shadows, a land where the unknown reigns. For those brave enough to visit, the stories of Portlock serve as a reminder. Some mysteries are best left undisturbed.